My family moved near a state forest, and when I was in middle school, our house was maybe a 15-minute walk from the tree line, and since there wasn't much to do in our area, I spent a lot of time hiking around out there. I never went super deep or anything, but I'd explored enough to feel comfortable with the trails near my neighborhood. By the time I was 17, I'd gotten really into flying drones. I saved up for my job at the grocery store and bought a decent one with a camera and everything. I wasn't amazing at flying it, but I was getting better. Anyway, this happened last summer, probably late June or early July. I was flying my drone in the field behind our house and trying to get some footage of the forest canopy. I'd been flying for maybe 20 minutes when I lost signal. The screen on my controller just went blank, and I couldn't get it to reconnect. I was pretty sure the drone had crashed somewhere in the woods, which sucked because that thing cost me like $400. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to figure out where it went down. Based on the direction it was heading and how far it had traveled before I lost signal, I figured it couldn't have gone too deep into the woods, probably just past the tree line, maybe a couple hundred yards in at most. The problem was that it was already getting late in the day, and my parents would definitely not let me go into the woods by myself to look for it before dark. If I told them what happened, they'd probably make me wait until the weekend when my dad could go with me, and by then someone else might find it, or animals could mess it up. I was pretty freaked out about going in there at night, honestly. I'd hiked those woods plenty of times during the day, but never once after dark. Just the thought of it made me anxious. My older sister Vanessa was home from college for the summer, though, and she's always been the fearless type. She does rock climbing and goes on camping trips by herself and all that stuff. When I told her what happened, she just said we should go look for it after everyone went to bed. I told her I didn't think that was a good idea. Maybe we should just wait, but she said if I wanted my drone back, I needed to get it before the weather turned or something happened to it. She had a point, and I knew if I waited and told my parents, I'd get a lecture about being more careful with expensive things, so we agreed to sneak out and look for it. Vanessa seemed almost excited about it, like it was some kind of adventure. We waited until our parents went to bed, then grabbed a couple flashlights and headed out. It was a clear night, and the moon was pretty bright, so we could see okay until we actually got to the forest. The field behind our house was well lit enough, but the tree line looked completely black. When we got to the edge of the woods, Vanessa just walked right in without hesitating. I followed behind her, turning on my flashlight as soon as the darkness swallowed us up. It was way darker than I expected. The moonlight basically disappeared once we were under the canopy. We didn't really have a plan for finding the drone. I just pointed us in the general direction I thought it had gone, and we started walking and sweeping our flashlights around, looking for any sign of it. Vanessa kept making jokes about how creepy it was, but in a way that made it clear she wasn't actually scared. I laughed along, but I was getting more and more uneasy the further we went. Every sound seemed amplified. We'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I started to realize we'd gone way deeper than I thought we'd need to. The drone should have been closer to the tree line, based on my calculations, but we hadn't seen any sign of it. The woods felt different this deep in. The trees were older and thicker, and there was less undergrowth. It was quieter too, like the normal forest sounds had faded away. I was starting to get that feeling like something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on why. We walked in silence for a few more minutes and just moving our flashlights around and looking for any glimpse of the drone. Then Vanessa stopped suddenly and held up her hand. I froze and listened. At first I didn't hear anything, but then I caught it, a sound like someone digging. It was rhythmic, like metal hitting dirt over and over. It was coming from somewhere ahead of us and to the right. Vanessa moved her flashlight toward the sound, and I did the same. In the beam of our lights, maybe 30 feet away, there was someone crouched down on the ground. He was digging with a small shovel, and there was already a decent-sized hole in front of him. He must have heard us or seen our lights in because he stopped digging and stood up. He was tall, wearing dark clothes and a beanie. I couldn't make out his face very well because of the shadows, but I could see he was staring directly at us. For what felt like forever, nobody moved. We just stood there with our flashlights on him, and he stood there, holding the shovel, looking at us. I wanted to run immediately, but my legs felt frozen. Then I noticed there was something next to the hole. It looked like a bag or a bundle of some kind. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing. Vanessa grabbed my arm and whispered, "We need to leave right now." That snapped me out of it. We both turned and started walking quickly back the way we came. Vanessa pulled her flashlight down so it wasn't as bright, and I did the same. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind us, or for someone to grab me from behind. But there was nothing. Just our own footsteps and our breathing. We just kept moving toward where we thought the tree line was. After a few minutes, Vanessa started walking faster, and then we were basically jogging. My heart was pounding, and I kept shining my flashlight around, paranoid that the guy had circled around and was going to jump out at us. When we finally broke through the tree line and into the field, I've never felt more relieved. We could see our house in the distance with the porch light on. We snuck back inside and went straight to Vanessa's room. She closed the door, and we just sat there for a minute, catching our breath. I asked her if we should tell someone, call the police or something. But she said, and tell them what? That we snuck out at night and saw some guy digging a hole in the woods? She was right. We couldn't even describe what he looked like, really, and I had no idea exactly where in the woods we'd been. Plus, we'd get in huge trouble for sneaking out. Vanessa made me promise not to tell our parents. We both agreed we weren't going to go looking for my drone again. The next morning, I told my parents I'd crashed my drone in the woods and couldn't find it. My dad was annoyed but said we could go look for it over the weekend. I made up some excuse about why I didn't want to. Said I'd already looked and it was probably destroyed anyway. I never did get that drone back. I saved up and bought a new one eventually, but I only fly it in open areas now, nowhere near the woods. Vanessa went back to college at the end of summer, and we've never really talked about that night since. I need to warn you about something that's been going on at my property for the past few years. I don't know if anyone's going to believe me, or if this is even the right place to share it, but I've been telling basically anyone who'll listen, and I need to get it out there one more time. I've already talked to my coworkers, my family, a couple of different police departments, even tried contacting some paranormal investigators online. Nothing ever comes of it. I can't really put my finger on why, but I feel like I need to document this for as many people as possible. Here's the situation. It's late 2019 right now as I'm typing this out. The whole thing started way back. I'm talking probably 2013 or so. Could have been 2014. Honestly, I'm not great with exact years, but somewhere around there. I was in my late 20s at the time and had just bought my first real piece of property. I never got married, never had kids, so I'd been saving up money from my job at the plant for a while. The pay's decent, and I don't really spend much, so I had enough for a down payment on something small. The property I ended up buying was about 40 minutes outside of town. It's not much, just an old single-wide trailer on like 3 acres. But the price was right, and I've always been a guy who likes his privacy. The previous owner was some old guy who died, and I guess his kids just wanted to unload it as fast as possible. The trailer itself is pretty run down, but I fixed it up over the years. New roof, new windows, that kind of thing. It's livable. What really sold me on the place, though, was the location. The 3 acres of clearing sits right at the edge of this absolutely huge stretch of forest. I'm talking thousands of acres of nothing but trees. It's part of some nature preserve or something, so nobody can build on it or develop it. That means I basically have unlimited woods to explore and hunt in right in my backyard, which was perfect for me. Growing up, I spent a ton of time outdoors, So having all that wilderness right there felt like hitting the jackpot. Plus, I'm the kind of person who's always enjoyed being alone. I mean really alone, so the isolation didn't bother me one bit. If anything, it was the main selling point. Anyway, I'd been living there for maybe 6 months when the first incident happened. It was sometime in the spring. I can't tell you exactly what month, but I remember the weather was getting warmer and everything was turning green again. It was a Saturday morning, I think. I had just woken up and was looking for my work gloves because I was planning to do some clearing around the property. I couldn't find them anywhere. I tore apart my trailer looking for them, but they were just gone. I figured I'd probably left them outside somewhere and forgot about them. When I went out to check, I found them sitting in the middle of my yard, maybe 30 feet from my front door. They were placed together, palms up like someone had set them down carefully. My initial reaction was confusion more than anything. I figured maybe I'd put them there myself and forgot about it, even though I knew that didn't make sense. I definitely remembered having them inside the last time I used them. Still, I just grabbed them and went about my day. I probably should have thought more about it, but I was busy with other stuff, and it seemed like I was just being forgetful. I wish I could remember more details from that first time, but it was so long ago that most of it's fuzzy. It must have been at least a year, maybe 2 years later when something else happened. I want to say it was 2015 because I remember it was the same summer I finally saved up enough to buy my four-wheeler. I came home from work one evening and noticed my fishing tackle box was missing from the shed. I'd locked the shed like I always do, but when I checked, the lock was still secure. The door hadn't been forced or anything, but the tackle box was definitely gone. The next morning, I found it sitting at the edge of the woods, right where the clearing meets the tree line. All my lures and equipment were spread out on the ground in front of it. I'm generally a pretty calm person, so I wasn't going to freak out or anything, but I'll admit it was unsettling. I stood there looking at it for a while, trying to figure out if this was some kind of prank. The problem was, I didn't really have any friends who lived close enough to pull something like this off. Plus, how the hell did someone get into my locked shed without breaking the lock? I checked every window on the trailer, and none of them had been tampered with. I even looked around inside to see if anything else was missing, but everything seemed normal. I ended up collecting all my fishing gear and taking it back inside. I told myself to just forget about it. That night I couldn't really sleep. I kept thinking about my stuff being taken and then carefully arranged out by the woods. It didn't make any sense. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. Who would go through that much trouble? Nothing happened for a long time after that. I'm talking years. Honestly, I pretty much forgot the whole thing even happened. Life just went on as normal. I'd go to work, come home, spend weekends hunting or fishing or working on the trailer. It was peaceful. I wouldn't be writing this if that was the end of it, though. What happened next was way worse. This was just last year, probably around October of 2018. I remember because hunting season was about to start and I was getting my gear ready. I woke up one morning and realized my hunting rifle was missing. Not the cheap one, my good rifle that I'd saved up for months to buy. I panicked immediately. That thing cost me over $1,000, and more importantly, I did not want some random person walking around with my firearm. I tore the trailer apart looking for it. I checked the shed, my truck, everywhere I could think of. It was gone. This time I didn't hesitate. I called the sheriff's department right away and reported it stolen. When the deputy showed up, I explained the whole situation, including the previous incidents with my gloves and tackle box. He said he'd file a report, but I could tell he thought I was either careless or making it up. I was furious. I spent the whole day searching my property and the immediate area around it, but found nothing. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I forced myself to go into the woods to look for it. I figured maybe whoever took it had dropped it or left it somewhere nearby. I grabbed my other rifle and headed into the tree line, walking in a grid pattern to cover as much ground as possible. I must have been out there for 2 hours, when I finally found it. My rifle was leaning against a tree, maybe half a mile into the woods. It was just standing there, propped up carefully like someone had placed it on display. The safety was on, and it was unloaded. I grabbed my rifle and got the hell out of those woods as fast as I could. When I got back, I called the sheriff's department again. The same deputy came out, and I showed him photos I'd taken of where I found the rifle. He suggested I invest in a security system and keep my doors locked. I asked him how a camera would help when someone was apparently able to get inside without leaving any trace. He didn't have an answer for that. After he left, I checked every single window and door in my trailer. I looked for hidden entrances, loose panels, any way someone could be getting in. Over the next few months, it kept happening. Not every week, but regularly enough that I was constantly on edge. I'd wake up and find random things missing. Sometimes I'd find them in my yard, sometimes at the edge of the woods. I started keeping a list of everything that went missing and where I found it. I thought maybe there was a pattern that would help me figure out who was doing this or why. But there was no pattern. It seemed completely random. The only consistent thing was that items kept being placed deeper and deeper into the woods. I thought about setting up trail camera, but something stopped me. Part of me didn't want to know what I'd see on those recordings. Plus, I figured whoever was doing this would probably just take the cameras too. Finally, around March, something happened that forced me to take action. I woke up one morning and realized my grandfather's watch was missing. It's the only thing I have from him, and it's worth more to me than everything else I own combined. I knew immediately that it had been taken. I'd left it on my nightstand like I always do, and now it was gone. I felt this surge of rage that I'd never experienced before. Whoever was doing this had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I called up my cousin Derek and asked if he'd help me search the woods. I explained everything that had been happening, and to his credit, he didn't question whether I was crazy. He just said he'd drive up that weekend and help me look. Derek showed up on Saturday morning with camping gear and his hunting rifle. We packed supplies for a full day in the woods. I wasn't taking any chances. Those woods are massive, and I knew we might end up going deep. Before we left, I showed Derek the list I'd been keeping of missing items and where I'd found them. He studied it for a while and said it looked like things were being placed in a roughly northwestern direction, going deeper each time. We decided to head northwest and see what we could find. At first, we stayed pretty close to my property, searching in a careful pattern. We didn't find anything for the first hour or so, just normal forest. Then Derek spotted something weird. There was a stack of rocks balanced against a tree trunk. We marked the location on the GPS and then kept moving. Another 20 minutes later, we found another stack, then another. It was like a trail. Derek said whoever was doing this was definitely leading us somewhere. Part of me wanted to turn back, but I needed to find my grandfather's watch. We kept following the rock stacks deeper into the woods. I don't know how long we walked after that, but eventually we ended up in a part of the forest I'd never seen before. The trees were thicker, older. Everything felt darker even though it was the middle of the day. Derek suggested we mark our trail so we could find our way back. We found 3 more rock stacks, each one spaced maybe 200 yards apart. The last one was the biggest, probably 4 feet tall. Right next to it, arranged in a circle, were my missing items. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Even my work gloves from that first incident years ago. And in the center of the circle was my grandfather's watch. I won't lie to you. I was terrified. Derek was too, even though he tried to act tough about it. We stood there for a minute, just staring at this bizarre arrangement. Derek whispered that we should grab everything and get out of there immediately. I started gathering my stuff, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were boot prints in the soft dirt. Fresh ones. Derek pointed out that the prints looked strange, like whoever made them had been walking backward. The toe impressions were deeper than the heels. He said he'd never seen anything like it. We collected everything as quickly as we could and started heading back, following the markers we'd left. The whole way, I had this overwhelming feeling that we were being watched. About halfway back, Derek grabbed my arm and pointed to our left. There was another boot print, this one crossing our path. It definitely hadn't been there when we walked through the first time. We stood there in complete silence for at least a minute. I didn't hear anything unusual, just normal forest sounds. But something felt wrong. Derek whispered that we needed to move faster. When we finally got back to my clearing, I've never felt more relieved in my life. Derek wanted to call the police immediately, but I convinced him to wait until we'd calmed down and could explain everything clearly. We called the sheriff's department an hour later. They sent the same deputy as before, plus another officer. We showed them the photos we'd taken of the circle of items and the rock stacks, and explained where we'd found everything. The officers seemed more concerned this time, probably because Derek was there to back up my story. They said they'd send someone into the woods to investigate the location. They told us not to go back out there in the meantime. A few days later, they called to tell me they'd searched the area but didn't find anything. They said maybe we'd gotten confused about the location, or the rain had washed things away. I knew that was bullshit. Derek left after that. I could tell the whole thing had freaked him out more than he wanted to admit. Before he drove off, he told me I should seriously consider moving somewhere else. He said whatever was happening wasn't normal and probably wasn't safe. That was many months ago. Since then, things have been different. Items still go missing from my trailer, but I don't find them anymore. I've gone into the woods a few times to look, but I never find anything. It's like whoever's doing this knows I'm looking now. The worst part is the sounds at night. I hear footsteps outside sometimes, walking around the trailer. Slow, deliberate footsteps that circle the property. When I look out the windows, there's never anyone there. I've started sleeping with my rifle next to my bed. I've installed extra locks on all my doors and windows. I even bought motion sensor lights for the yard, but they go off constantly with nothing visible to trigger them. My boss has noticed I've been distracted at work. I've lost weight because I barely eat anymore. A couple of my coworkers have suggested I see a doctor or talk to someone, but what am I supposed to say? I've thought about moving, but I've got all my money tied up in this property. Plus, part of me feels like I shouldn't have to leave my own land just because someone's harassing me. At the same time, I'm exhausted. I'm tired of things disappearing. Winter's coming up again, and I have this feeling things are going to get worse. I don't know why I think that, but I do. I've been trying to prepare, stocking up on supplies, and making sure everything's secure. But I don't know what else to do. Like I said at the beginning, I've told pretty much everyone about this situation. Most people don't know what to make of it. Some folks think it's some kind of stalker. Others think maybe it's homeless people living in the woods. A few people have suggested it might not even be people at all, which I don't even want to think about. All I know is that something is happening on my property, and it's been going on for years now. I'm going to keep documenting everything that happens and sharing it with as many people as I can. Maybe eventually someone will have an answer or know what to do. Until then, I'm just trying to stay alert and hope they don't escalate to something worse. I own a small hunting cabin out in the Washington wilderness, about 6 hours east of Seattle. It belonged to my uncle before he passed, and I've been going up there a few times a year ever since. This happened back in 2021. I had driven out on a Friday evening after work and got there around 9:30 p.m. The last stretch is this narrow gravel road that winds through dense forest for about 2 miles. The closest town is about 45 minutes away, and I've never seen another car on that road in all my years of driving it. When I got to the cabin and walked up to the front door, I noticed something strange. The door was unlocked. I distinctly remember locking it the last time I left, but I figured maybe I was misremembering. It had been about 4 months since my last visit. I pushed it open and flipped on the lights. The first thing I saw was the back door. The bottom panel was cracked inward, like someone had kicked it hard from outside. There were splinters on the floor, and the wood around the lock was all chewed up. My heart sank a little, but I told myself it was probably just an animal. I checked the rest of the cabin. Nothing seemed disturbed, and nothing was missing as far as I could tell. The damage was just that one door panel. I figured whatever animal did it must have given up and left. I found some scrap plywood in the shed and nailed it over the broken section from the inside. Good enough for the weekend. I unloaded my truck and got settled in, made myself some dinner, had a couple beers, and sat by the wood stove reading. The cabin warmed up nice and I started feeling pretty relaxed. By 11 I was getting tired, so I added some logs to the stove and headed to the bedroom. The bedroom is small, just a bed and a dresser and a closet. I remember the closet door was open a few inches when I went to bed. I didn't think anything of it. I set my phone alarm for 6:30 and fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up suddenly sometime later. It was that kind of waking up where your eyes just snap open and your heart is already going. I lay there listening, but the cabin was silent, except for the wood stove ticking in the other room. I got up to use the bathrooms and get some water. When I walked into the main room, I noticed something that made me stop. There was a muddy boot print on the floor. The plywood I had nailed up was still in place, but the print was fresh, like someone had been standing there recently. I felt my stomach drop. I looked around the room more carefully now. There was another print, fainter, leading toward the hallway. I followed it with my eyes. It went past the bathroom and then stopped right outside my bedroom door. My hands were shaking as I walked back to the bedroom. I pushed the door open slowly and looked at the floor. There were faint muddy marks on the wood, barely visible. They went from the doorway toward the closet. The closet door was closed now. I took a step closer. Just one step. The closet door had these old wooden slats, the kind you can almost see through if the light is right. The glow from the hallway was hitting it just enough, and that's when I saw it. Through the gap in the slats, there was an eye looking back at me. My whole body just locked up for a second. It was a human eye, wide open, unblinking. I ran. I grabbed my keys off the kitchen counter and went straight out the front door. I didn't even have shoes on. I got in my truck and drove the whole way into town barefoot, shaking the entire time. The police came back with me. About an hour and a half later, the closet was empty. The back door was now wide open, the plywood torn off from the inside. They searched around the property with flashlights, but found nothing. The officer said whoever it was must have taken off into the woods right after I left. I drove home that night and I haven't been back since. That was over 5 years ago now.